Welcome to Deep Focus. I'm John Kiriakou. The Middle East is in a state of chaos. The Syrian government of Bashar-al Assad has been overthrown. Israel has all but destroyed Gaza and killed tens of thousands of people at least. The Israeli military and intelligence services have decapitated Hezbollah for all intents and purposes. The Russians have all gone home, and the Iranians are left to try to figure out how in the world they were so unceremoniously dumped from Syria. In the meantime, Iraq is still replete with militias, a genocide is ongoing in Sudan, and Turkey is sitting in the catbird seat. Could it get any worse? We're going to talk about all of this with Matthew Hoh. Matthew has been a senior fellow with the Center for International Policy since 2010. In 2009, Matthew resigned in protest from his post in Afghanistan with the State Department over the American escalation of the war there. Prior to his assignment in Afghanistan, Matthew took part in the American occupation of Iraq, first in 2004 and 2005 in Salahuddin province with the State Department Reconstruction and Governance team, and then again in 2006 and 2007 in Anbar province as a Marine Corps company commander. When not deployed, Matthew worked on Afghanistan and Iraq war policy and operations issues at the Pentagon and at the State Department from 2002 to 2008. Matthew's writings have appeared in such periodicals as the Atlanta Constitution newspaper, CNN, Defense News, The Guardian, The Huffington Post, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, and The Washington Post. He has been a guest on hundreds of news programs on radio and television, and the prestigious Council on Foreign Relations has cited his resignation letter from his post in Afghanistan as an essential document. That's very cool. In 2010, Matthew was named the Ridenour Prize recipient for truth-telling, and in 2021, he was awarded as a Defender of Liberty by the Committee for the Republic. Matthew, my friend, it's great having you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, John, it's good to see you. And I apologize. That's the very, very, very long form bio I have. I should have sent you guys.
No,
made sure you had the shorter one.
I was gonna edit it down, and then as I went through it, it was all so important that I decided to leave the whole thing in.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Just two updates, actually. I'm no longer with the Center for International Policy, and I'm with the Eisenhower Media Network now. So
excellent.
Just a couple updates. But no, I appreciate it, John.
Great.
It's so good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
Love to see what you're doing, with your work. You're doing great stuff.
Thank you. And you know what? There are very few people in the world that I would want to talk about the Middle East with more than you. Almost none. So I wanted to start by saying, like you, I've spent almost the entirety of my adult life either living in, working on, or studying the Middle East. It seems to me that what we're seeing now is a once in a generation situation. The Middle East was on fire in 1991, for example. But that was 34 years ago. What do you think we're looking at today? Is it possible for this to get worse? And if so, what does worse look like?
Yeah, I think certainly we live in interesting times, horrible times for many.
Yeah.
And for those who are observing, it's amazing what has occurred there. And I'm trying to find the right word to use. I don't mean it in a positive manner, because the suffering has been just immense. The horrors have been historic, and then of course the dangers of what's to come are very real. And I think the way I have described it is that we may just be in the opening chapters of the book that will be written about this Middle Eastern era. Particularly with the genocide in Gaza, and as horrific as that is, and God help me for saying that may just be the first act in all of this. So the genocide in Gaza may be akin to, say, the Balkans War that preceded the First World War, where the Balkans War, which took place 1912 to 1913, million and a half people were killed, ethnic cleansing was involved. The world was horrified by it. And then 1914 came, and so that essentially, I think, is where we may be at. Certainly, the remaking of the Middle East, the strategic success of Israel in the last several months, as well as this turning, as well as this intersection we appear to be at. of what may come next. What are the Israelis and Americans planning to do next? How will other nations react? How is Turkey going to be involved in all of this? I mean, all these various things. So essentially, we are in a great game. This is what when we hear the phrase "the great game," this is what people are looking at. Just in Syria, an example. Look at all the various nations involved in Syria, right? The Turks, the Americans, the Israelis, the Qataris, the Saudis. I mean, on and on and on. I mean, within a week or two of HTS take in Damascus, the German and French foreign ministers were there. I mean, so you have essentially this great game occurring, and what occurs next is difficult to see. And I think a lot of us are holding our breath with expectation. There is the possibility that it could be some form of Pax Americana / Israeli, where essentially those who wanted to see Israeli preeminence in the region be established, get what they're looking for. And now I'm specifically referring back to the neoconservatives from the 1990s, the Project for a New American Century, those who wrote the Clean Break Strategy, those who gave us the Iraq War, seeing their dreams fulfilled 30 years later.
It seems like in the face of all this violence, Turkey somehow has come out of it smelling like a rose. Just when we thought that, for example, in the aftermath of that earthquake that took place, a year and a half ago, that Erdogan was done. Erdogan's not done. Right. The Turks backed the winning side in Syria. They seem to have patched up their differences with Israel without anybody looking. And they control both the border with Syria now and much of the oil that's coming from Syria. What's the Turkish goal here? Do the Turks have a long-term strategy?
Well, certainly the Turks want to not just be the key nation in the region, but a key nation in the world. Yeah, I remember 20 some odd years ago. Now I'm going to blank on his name. The guy, George Friedman, the guy who ran Stratfor, if you remember that organization. Sure do. I remember going to a lecture he gave, and he spoke about Turkey in 2030. It was probably 25. It was probably in 2005, and it's probably 25 years out. Who I see as being, the most important nations or nations that will be dominant that are not dominant now, strong nations, and Turkey was one of them. And we're certainly seeing the Turks wanting to establish themselves as a military, economic, and geopolitical power. Again, just not for the region, but for the world. I mean, certainly Turkey's history, their place in the world, right, as connecting Europe and Asia. Mm-hmm. All of these things give them the historical background to want that desire made real. And so for the Turks, what I think they're trying to accomplish in Syria, of course, is control over their neighbor, having a stable Syria that reflects their interests, as well as then, of course, the big thing for the Turks immediately is the diminishment of Rojava, the autonomous Kurdish zone in eastern Syria. And of course, that leads into the Turkish issues and overall with the Kurds, particularly in their own country. So a lot of this has to do with domestic political concerns for the Turks, but also to the larger picture of wanting to be not just, again, a major regional force, but a world power. And where they are heading with this in terms of how they view their role in the Middle East specifically is that they want to have a seat at the table when the Americans make decisions, when the Chinese come in. But they have larger views as well then outside of that of the region, where they see themselves as playing a major role, again, militarily, economically, politically, but also to realizing the diminishment or decline of the American empire, the fracturing of Europe, the rise of other powers, whether they be Russia, China, India, the BRICS nations, et cetera, and seeing that there is a future for them, again, as a major player in the world because of these changing dynamics. And I think in a lot of ways, the change in the Middle East reflects the overall international change in terms of balance of power. But it's not rosy for the Turks. Certainly, what may come out of trying to destroy the Kurdish autonomy in eastern Syria. There's been a lot of fighting, over 500 dead on both sides. The Turks just launched a major operation to seize a dam in order to try and essentially turn off
Yes,
the water to the Turks,
that's right.
right? As well as they seem to be traveling in conflict with the Israelis. That at some point the Israelis and the Turks, with their goals, with their own goals, will run into conflict with each other. And the Israelis certainly believe that. They had a couple weeks ago, members of the Knesset formed a committee to prepare for war with Turkey in the future. So it's certainly, again, this is why I say, are we only in the opening chapters of the book here?
Help us understand the Israeli role in all this. Gaza is destroyed for all intents and purposes. It seems clear that war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed against Palestinians. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. Uh, the British medical journal, oh my gosh, the name escapes me right
The
now.
Lancet.
The Lancet,
Yeah.
thank you, says that number could be as high as 180,000 dead. Gaza doesn't have a single functioning hospital. There isn't enough food. There isn't enough water, medicine for 2 million displaced people. Uh, but now there's a ceasefire. Is this really a ceasefire? Is there any real relief in sight for Gazans?
Well, in the immediate aspects, there are. And just in the last 5 days, between 600 and 900 trucks have gotten in every day, including many fuel trucks. So that type of immediate relief is being provided, or is being allowed in. The Palestinian people of Gaza are moving back to their homes. They are trying to dig out from the rubble. They're trying to, you see these terrible stories, the hundreds of bodies that are being recovered with just pick and shovel. They don't have the heavy equipment to really start moving the the rubble. And just as
Okay.
an aside, the UN estimates, it says it's going to take 14 years to remove the rubble.
Oh my
Another
God.
estimate I saw was just to rebuild all the homes and apartments. That will be until 2040 until that's able to be accomplished. But in the sheer magnitude of what they're up against. But they have people out there turning the water back on, trying to turn the water back on, trying to turn the sewage off from running into the streets. All that, the calamity, the horror, the catastrophe of this genocide. They're doing their best as they can without fear now of being killed by the Israelis. And the Israelis are still killing some people. They're killing a few people every day, shooting them dead. For Israel, it's hard for me to see what they plan to do. Certainly, and Hamas actually just released a statement about this yesterday. How the ceasefire hostage exchange deal may be in jeopardy because Palestinians rightly don't trust the Israelis. And they don't trust the Israelis because of the Israelis' own words about this. So whether it's from Prime Minister Netanyahu, whether it's from Finance Minister Smotrich, whether it's from the entire cabinet, who when the Israeli cabinet approved the ceasefire deal, they, as part of the resolution approving it, they said we will begin military operations again. We will reoccupy all of Gaza, and we will take care of control of all humanitarian aid. And those statements have been echoed throughout Israeli media, political circles, military circles. But at the same time, too, the Israelis seem to have really begun a shift to the West Bank. And this is really important because the West Bank has always been the priority for the Israelis. Gaza is, always been. It always has been. This has been the crown jewel. It's Hezbollah, Iran, Assad in Syria, Gaza. Those have always been what we call supporting efforts for the main effort in the West Bank. And this is why I said earlier about the Israeli strategic success. And so the Israelis, certainly beginning in the summer, they seem to launch a plan. Up until that point, it didn't seem like the Israelis have much of a plan other than destroy Gaza. And hopefully we'll get some ethnic cleansing out of it. At this point now, you've seen them take Hezbollah off the battlefield. Of course, that ceasefire is ending in the next week. We'll see what occurs there. The Israelis certainly have not pulled out of southern Lebanon as they said they would. And just again this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office said, we're not going to meet that 60-day deadline. We're still going to have troops there. But you've seen what they took as Netanyahu took as a credit, the removal of Assad in Syria, but also the Israeli pushing of their forces farther into Syria, past the Golan Heights, which of course they have illegally annexed. They've essentially, I feel, they've deterred Iran and Israel have essentially deterred one another. Iran's ballistic missile capabilities that they demonstrated this past year, I think, have deterred Iran to a degree. I mean, Israel to a degree. However, there still is such a sentiment in Israel that we have to strike Iran while we can in order to, one, just continue this supporting effort for the West Bank, but also to just make good on the promises, deliver on what we've always said, that we will eventually have victory over the Iranians. So more of a political thing for them than a strategic thing. But certainly the idea for the Israelis then is have the Americans do that. And if the Americans do that, particularly if it's a sustained campaign that lasts for a year or two, then it will allow the Israelis to have much less pressure as they conduct their operations to annex the West Bank, and certainly it'll be a huge distraction. And then, of course, with Gaza, we simply don't know what their plans are. They still haven't let people back into northern Gaza. Northern Gaza has been the prime effort within the Gaza campaign these last several months. The Israelis have focused on northern Gaza, ethnically cleansing it, pushing people south out of Beit Lahun and Jabalia and down into Gaza City. And just in these last weeks before the ceasefire began, the Israeli army started clearing operations, ethnic cleansing operations in Gaza City as well. The idea of pushing everyone out of that northern third of Gaza into the bottom 2/3 of Gaza. They seem to have no plans of what they want to do with the bottom 2/3 of Gaza, just let the people rot, immiserate them, and hope that something happens where they leave. But the northern part, they certainly have plans to put the remaining Palestinians into essentially concentration camps and resettle northern Gaza. And again, this is what the Israeli cabinet said that they plan to do. We're going to settle Gaza. Now, the issue for them, of course, is, well, that if they're going to do that again, can they still do the West Bank? And I don't think they have the capacity to do that, that they can't do both, can't return both to their operations in Gaza and to take on the West Bank. But they also know the clock or the calendar is limited, and that they have to do everything they can during these 4 years of the Trump administration, because who knows what comes after that. So, I mean, that more than likely they're going to have someone in the Oval Office who's okay with them doing whatever they want to do, just like the last administration was. But this is a sure thing for them, and this is certainty. And you hear the Israelis say this over and over again. This is the best opportunity we've had in 50 years. So the Israelis strategically are in pretty good shape. Operationally, they're in better shape. These last couple of weeks have allowed them, or since the ceasefire, it'll allow them to refit, do maintenance, move forces around, prepare maybe to begin escalations again in Lebanon if need be, to carry out this annexation of the West Bank, to move back into the genocide operation in Gaza. We'll see. We really don't know what their plans are. And then politically, for Netanyahu and his government, this ceasefire deal so far has been, I believe, a success. And I think he's looking to get the best of both worlds out of this, where he's able to say, look, I got the majority of the hostages home, and then Hamas reneged on the deal, and they still proved a threat, and we had to go back in and finish the job. And he gets both sides, he gets credit both ways for it. His government doesn't collapse. And even if it does, I think he believes, and the polls are show that he likely could stay in power, that if an election comes, say in March, he's able to stay in power anyway. So you look at it that way, operationally, strategically, and politically, this ceasefire has been a good deal for the Israelis, just depending on what they do next. And of course, for Donald Trump, as Chris Hedges called it, this was a presidential inauguration bombing pause. And he didn't speak much about it at his inauguration speech in the Rotunda. But if you watched the parade and the other things that occurred at the Capital One Arena, this was the centerpiece of that, to the point that he made a speech. Steve Witkoff, his envoy to the Middle East, the man who's credited with getting this deal through, he made a speech, and then they brought up families of the Israeli hostages onto the stage with yellow scarves around them. And they were the backdrop for Trump's speech. They were the backdrop or the props for when Trump started signing executive orders. So certainly the deal that was made between Witkoff and Netanyahu in terms of, there, it seems to have probably been more carrots exchanged between each other than threats of sticks.
I want to ask you follow-ups about both the West Bank and Gaza. Just in the last couple of days, the Israelis have moved into the West Bank, specifically in Jenin and Nablus, in a big way, and they've killed dozens of people. Is this the beginning now of phase 2 of an Israeli military action, whereby rather than focus on Gaza, which is destroyed, now they start carrying out large scale operations in the West Bank with the same idea? As you touched on a moment ago, there's a bill pending in the Knesset that's been proposed by Smotrich to expel all Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
There's even an idea out there to relocate all the Palestinians to an island owned by Indonesia,
right?
Just to get them out, and then Israel can have the whole of Greater Israel. Is that really what we're looking at here?
Certainly, that's their hope. I mean, the hope with the say the ethnic cleansing in Gaza was that they would be forced into Egypt and into Jordan. And both those countries, of course, were not going to participate in the ethnic cleansing.
No, you don't.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you remember, if you go back about a year, and there was when the funding bills for Israel started being put forward, there was a large amount of money for humanitarian aid designated.
That's right.
And a substantial portion of that aid from the U.S. was going to be to build essentially a city in the Sinai for the Palestinians. And of course, that went nowhere. There's always been this great hope that ocean liners are going to show up and take the Palestinians away someplace. And if people remember the pier that the Department of Defense built, that farce that occurred last spring, supposedly that pier, the idea of it came from the Israelis, with the idea being stuff can come in and people can go out. And, so that has always been the desire of the Israelis to get the people out. You saw them again the last several months as they conducted what's called the General's Plan, the Surrender or Starve campaign in the northern part of Gaza. They were successful in pushing most of the inhabitants, more than 1 million people, south of what's called the Netzarim corridor. Those people still have not been able to go back. There's actually just a report today in Axios that private contractors, including American contractors, will be the ones who man the Netzarim corridor and will man the checkpoints, will decide who gets to go back in or not, which may, if that's the case, then the Israelis may not be going back in, or at least they know they don't have the force structure for it. But certainly your points about their operations in places like Jenin and Nablus, which are centers of resistance. So you would expect if they were going to mount a campaign that they would go after where the armed resistance is located. The idea to try and quash that. And I just heard someone the other day saying that if the armed resistance in those centers are quashed, it really will limit the amount of armed Palestinian resistance throughout the West Bank, which of course is limited compared to what will be able to be done, what Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others were able to accomplish in Gaza. Now, one of the things you see then is, okay, if that's the case, they're shifting to the West Bank, do they have the wherewithal to do it? And another sign that they're preparing for it is that the Israelis are standing up 5 new brigades, which 5 brigades is a lot for a nation the size of Israel.
Yes.
And those 5 brigades, Johns, are going to be 38 to 58-year-olds. So, right,
God,
older men, older reservists who can man a checkpoint, who can drive a truck, right? And this way, the younger men and women, the younger soldiers, they're on the streets, kicking in doors, shooting kids, doing what the Israeli army does. So I think that's what you're looking at here is this decision point, and it's only made more difficult for the Israelis in terms of not beginning the operations in the West Bank, because you have had this video of continuous defiance coming out of Gaza. So the Israeli public is not seeing a defeated people. They're seeing a ruined society. They're seeing a society where 70, 80% of all the roads and structures and infrastructure has been destroyed, where there's barely any plant life alive anymore, right? But what they're seeing is defiance. They're seeing that famous Palestinian steadfastness, Samud, in place. And they're also hearing the Palestinians declare the ceasefire deal as a victory. that Israel didn't get anything out of this. All they did was that, yes, they hurt us, they killed our families, but we're still here and we're still resisting. And that's going to be a big political problem for the Israelis, for this governing coalition, if they do not go back in and quash that. So it comes down to this issue of that here they have done everything they feel they needed to do, prepare as well, particularly with Trump coming into office, to have the opportunity to begin the annexation of the West Bank. And now they still have this Gaza issue, which is always going to be an issue unless they're able to successfully ethnically cleanse Gaza, which, again, and a dangerous thing, I do want to comment on that idea of them being shipped to Indonesia, is we know that because of an American source, an American official in the Trump transition team told that to NBC News. And so you can see that this is something that the Americans are discussing with the Israelis, and it wasn't, and there was nothing in there, of course, that said, no, we told them you can't do that. Now, interestingly, the Indonesians said, we've never heard of this.
That's right.
Right. Of course, we wouldn't take part in it. But yeah, I mean, it is. It's hard to tell what they'll do next because it is very complex. But the Israelis are in a position where they can decide what they do next. They're not reacting. And then, of course, tied to all this is Iran. And again, I think many people from the U.S. would say, well, Iran is the biggest thing for Israel. And again, it's not. It's always been the West Bank. To the Americans, Iran is, right. And of course, the idea, John, of the Americans finally getting their chance to go after the great white whale of Iran is is something that people in D.C. really like the idea of.
This idea of moving Palestinians to some other country or place like Sinai or Indonesia, this is not a new idea.
No.
Back in the 1980s, you might remember along the Saudi-Iraqi border, there was this area. It was actually the shape of a diamond, and it was called the neutral zone because the sands were constantly shifting and nobody was really exactly sure where the border was. And there was talk of sending the Palestinians there to this neutral zone and declaring that to be Palestine. But nothing can live there. Right. There's no water. Even insects can't live there, right? There's no shade. There's no water. There are no oases. And then finally, in like 1989 or 1990, the Saudis and the Iraqis came to a border agreement, and that neutral zone disappeared. There is no neutral zone anymore. So it's not like somebody had this grand idea. Oh, I finally came up with the one thing that nobody has ever thought about before. We're going to send the Palestinians somewhere else. It's just not going to work. I wanted to mention, too, something that Donald Trump said a couple of weeks ago, maybe more than a couple now, 3 or 4 weeks ago. He said that Gaza could be the next Monaco. And then he said, no, Gaza could be better than Monaco. The reason why I say that that's scary was that he was talking about beachfront property and developing beachfront property. But the implication was that property would be developed by the Israelis. And indeed, there's this bill, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, in the Knesset that would expel all Palestinians and take their land, all of it.
Right.
Do you think that's where we're heading? And if the answer is yes, is the United States going to acquiesce to that?
Yes, I don't see why they would not. Certainly, they've acquiesced to everything. There's been hardly any resistance to Israeli actions for decades by successful administrations. I mean, certainly with President Carter's death, there's a lot of conversation about President Carter's role in office. Camp David, of course, are spoken about quite a bit. And commentary was about how the Palestinians were left out of that, and how then when the Israelis began to break the deals regarding the Palestinians in the West Bank that they had made with Egypt and the Americans at Camp David, the Americans did nothing about it. The same thing too with Bill Clinton and the Oslo process.
Yes,
the Israelis immediately began breaking that. They immediately, go 30 years ago, there was about 250,000 settlers in the West Bank, and now there's about 750,000 settlers, and that's occurred throughout every administration. The best we've seen was a very tepid action by the Obama administration as they were heading out the door, where they abstained from a UN Security Council vote. And that's been about the strongest action by the Americans that we've seen in essentially 30 years or longer. So this is desire of the Israelis. Certainly, you've seen various parts of Israeli society saying this, and it doesn't matter if it's from the settler class, the nationalist class, the militarist class, the same ideas. Even so, the militarists, those you describe, maybe more along the lines of Benny Gantz,
Mm-hmm.
who's often cited as an opposition figure who would take over for Netanyahu. It's the idea of a buffer zone. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's more of a secular Zionism, a secular view of Greater Israel, as opposed to the
The religious
reactionary
view.
religious right
Yes.
that has that divine cosmic purpose in all of this. But it's still there, and they still have the same end goals. Certainly, how far they want to go is debatable, and there is a not insignificant portion of Israel that believes that it should be past the West Bank. It should be past Gaza. You'll see Israeli soldiers with patches on their shoulders that say "from the Nile to the Euphrates," and the idea being is that from the land of Moses to the land of Abraham. Right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so there certainly is that idea that is there. And it's not, again, fringe. You had a few weeks ago on, I think it was Channel 12 in Israel, a discussion about taking military action against Egypt. And it all along this pot stirring about how the Egyptians are violating our ceasefire with them. They're violating the peace deal. They're moving forces around in the Sinai. They're moving forces around their own country. But that is among commentators in Israeli society was being used as a casus belli for
Right.
military action against Egypt. Now, certainly a year ago, I would have said you're nuts if you say that the Israelis would consider military action against Egypt. Now, I don't think it's probable or likely at all, but it's also possible. You know, I mean, it might be a single-digit percentage, but it's possible. And you know, the idea then of pushing all the Palestinians out, that certainly has been a goal. I think the issue in the West Bank will be, how do they do it? Is this potentially a deal that's being made by Trump with others? The first thing he's going to do is supposedly go and meet with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown
Mm-hmm.
Prince of Saudi Arabia. And if anyone caught his speech in Davos,
Right.
President Trump obviously praised MBS. And of course, MBS Trump relationship well understood. Saudi Arabia is the first nation that Trump visited in his last
Mm-hmm.
administration. It appears it's going to be in this. And I'm sure this will be on the table. Trump's view of all this, of course, the idea of Monaco, Gaza becoming Monaco. This is a standard Israeli talking point, a standard American Zionist talking point, that Gaza should have been Singapore. They had everything there to be Singapore. They should have been in Singapore, the Middle East, you know, just conveniently forgetting essentially a siege and a blockade, right? Along with massive air and ground campaigns continually prior to the genocide that begins in 23. So Trump's vision, though, I think is important to understand, in that he comes back to this idea of a grand deal or a grand bargain for Middle East. That was essentially what his Abraham Accords were. That was an overt attempt, among other things, to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But also too, I think he does value stability, and he does value the ability of commerce and business to occur unmolested between those who want to do it. Doesn't care about legitimacy of power, doesn't care about sovereignty, doesn't care about self-determination, human rights, any of those things. And so beyond the idea of Trump getting a Nobel Peace Prize for his grand bargain, I think he actually does think of the need to bring about, quote, peace, unquote, to the Middle East, in order to achieve these, his understanding of commerce and business and trade, et cetera. And of course, his version of peace is similar to what Tacitus said about the Romans' version of peace, where they
Right.
make a desert and they declare it peace, in the sense
That's
that they
right.
destroy everything and they say, look, it's peaceful now. In the
Mm-hmm.
Romans, of course, peace through victory was their slogan. That's
That's
the
right.
Israeli slogan as well. And Donald Trump, and particularly his people in his office, I think also believe more in peace through victory than they believe in peace through strength.
Okay, let me ask you about that then, because this is something that comes up in conversation informally around Washington all the time. Of course, you remember the old saying, only Nixon could go to China,
Right.
right? So Nixon was a China hawk. He was a Russia hawk. He was a lifelong anti-communist. And Nixon went to China, and we exchanged diplomatic representation, and we all lived happily ever after. So is it possible in your mind that Donald Trump, of all people, could make peace with Iran? And the reason I ask is because there's a story that was in, one of the memoirs that came out of Trump's first term. Um, I think it was one of the chiefs of staff who said that Trump entered the presidency with a desire to bomb North Korea. And whoever it was that was advising him said, no, you don't want to bomb North Korea. You want to make peace with North Korea, because that's what's going to put you in the history books. And then out of that conversation came the so-called love letter to Kim Jong-un. Nixon is very Trump is very transactional, as you said. Can you see a situation where Trump initiates talks with Iran? Can Trump forge some kind of peace with Iran? And if the answer is yes, what does that mean for the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I think the answer is yes, and I would point to Afghanistan, where Trump comes into office. He listens to his generals, McMaster, who was his national security advisor, Mattis, who was his defense secretary, Kelly, who was his chief of staff, and they escalate the war in Afghanistan massively. Now, the escalation also is because the war in Syria and Iraq was winding down, and we had the planes and the bombs to send to Afghanistan.
That's right.
But that coincided. But they did, and for 2 years, the United States launched massive airstrikes all throughout Afghanistan, major commando raids, right? Really facilitated the Afghan army and Afghan police as best they could, killed, God knows, tens and tens of thousands of people. And after 2 years, it hadn't worked. And so Trump shifted, and and he started talks with the Taliban. And those talks were immediately successful. Within 6 months, they had a deal. Then, if people remember, in the fall of 2018, you had, if it was fall of 2018, if I remember right, you had this issue where a big to-do got over the fact that Trump wanted to sign this deal at Camp David on September 11th. And then everyone pulled out of that. And then 6 months later, it was signed. But you saw that Trump was able to get a deal with the Taliban essentially in 6 months.
Yes.
So it certainly is there. I tend to think of Donald Trump's imperial view. And, certainly he's an emperor, just as other presidents are. And I encourage people to, put the word emperor rather than president in front of these men's names to better understand why they make decisions at times. But, Trump's view of the empire, I think, is probably similar to his view of his real estate empire, of his role as a construction developer. And it has to be dynamic. It has to be willing to change. It can't be static. And you have to be willing to pull out of bad markets and go into other markets in order to maintain your empire. And I think in a lot of ways that informs why Trump is so willing to walk away from the Europeans, if you will. That's how people describe it. And he certainly put the Europeans on notice in that Davos speech yesterday. But this notion of talking to Iran, I think certainly the Iranians are willing to do so. They've been willing to do so, saying it. Pezeshkian, the president who came into office in the spring, says it all the time.
Yeah.
But also we saw the talks between the U.S. and the Biden administration in Oman all throughout these last years. So even as you had tensions there, you had Israel and Iran attacking one another, you still had talks going on between the Americans and the Iranians quite often. So, certainly the mechanisms are there, right? The ability to do so is there. The problem will be is the resistance that Trump finds in two places. One with the Israelis, because for the Israelis, Iran is incredibly important in the sense that they are the bad guy in the region. The narrative always focuses on Iran, right? So it's a distraction, it's a distortion of what's occurring, but it's useful and it's helpful because it ties into the overall American understanding and narrative of the Middle East that has been the established narrative going back 40 plus years now, that the Iranians are the bad guys. The Iranians are the evildoers. The Iranians are the imperialists in the region. They want to take over everything, and so that will be where Trump runs into opposition from Israel and its lobby and from Washington, D.C., where, John, both in DC, within the blob, the foreign policy community, but also in America, in the United States itself. If you do a poll anytime in the last 40 years and you say, who are the three biggest dangers to the United States? Who are the three biggest American adversaries? Iran's sometimes number one, but I guarantee you in the last 40 years, Iran has never fallen out of below number three. In terms of right, the American perception of the dangers of the world.
Without
so that's a tough thing to go up against. Now, I will say the reason why I think he could do it, though, is because, and I'm sure this warms your heart to a degree, the way that he's been going after the intelligence committee or community, or willing to take them on.
Yes.
Whether it's taking away the clearances from those 51 intelligence officers, whether it's saying, hey, I'm releasing all the JFK and RFK and MLK records. And now, of course, we just had the court, U.S. District Court say FISA Section 702 is unconstitutional. And no one is certain as to what this administration is going to do about it. If it had Biden administration, certainly would have appealed it. And there will be those within the U.S. government who are adamant to Trump that you have to appeal this, but it's not a certainty that he will. Maybe news broke this morning that they will, but it's not a certainty. And so that shows if he's willing to take on the intelligence community, he may be willing to take on all these hawks. I mean, so, we'll see. But I think you have a better chance with that with Trump than you did with any previous president. Now, going back to Obama, of course. Which is many, I guess, just Trump and Biden. But anyway, but the danger is that Trump will have to do it in the Afghanistan model and give the military shot first, for if no other reason than optics, that we have to go and kill a whole heck of a lot of Iranians before I can start to make peace with these guys, so that I can then say, look, I forced them to the table, and if they act up again, I'll do it again.
Amen to that. Matthew Hoh is our guest, and Matt, I want you to tell people where they can find more about the work that you're doing.
Sure. You can find me on X, Matthew P. Hoh, last name spelled Hoh. Also on Substack. I'm Matthew Hoh on Substack or something like that. I should know it right.
The same way.
But then, and then my organization is the Eisenhower Media Network, so you can look us up as well.
Excellent. Important stuff. Man, I always so enjoy speaking with you. Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you, John.
Thank you.